Fresh water is the very essence of life. Yet 70% of the Earth's supply is locked up as ice and snow in the Arctic and Antarctic, frozen for all 4 seasons, forever denied to the world's plants and animals that thirst for it. Most of Asia escapes the Arctic's icy year-round grip. The fresh water imprisoned in winter is always released in spring. Over millions of years, the annual surge of melting ice and snow has shaped the land and nurtured life. In northeast Japan, some of Asia's cherry salmon have adapted to cold winters and short, warm summers. Instead of migrating to the ocean to grow, they spend all their lives in the freshwater rivers where they were born. The cranes of Hokkaido also remain throughout the winter, finding the food they need amid the ice and snow. The creatures of Northeast Asia have adapted to the freshwater habitats created by the melting ice and snow. They are the creatures of the thaw. Winters in Northeast Asia are so cold, fresh water all but disappears. Most creatures leave, but some have learned to eke out an existence. Shika deer use the ice as a shortcut to the few water holes that are not completely frozen over. To survive, they chew bark, even though it's hard to digest. The whooper swans have flown thousands of miles to escape an even harsher winter in Siberia. Where rivers still flow, life can survive the freeze. The swans look for havens where springs keep water ice-free and where they can feed on aquatic plants. From December to March, surface temperatures on the marshes rarely struggle above freezing. But natural springs ensure that the temperatures in some ponds are never quite as cold. And this is where the Ezo brown frog finds refuge. Unblinking, the frog looks dead. It is dormant, its metabolic rate slowed almost to a standstill, on hold until the spring. The young cherry salmon spend their first winter in the headwaters near the mountain slopes, where the water flows too quickly to freeze. They can tolerate temperatures close to freezing, and like the frogs, they shut their systems down for winter, stirring occasionally for food. The Japanese call the young cherry salmon yama-mei, which means beauty of the mountains. They're found only in the rivers of Japan and Northeast Asia. Even when air temperatures are well below freezing, natural springs prevent some rivers from icing over. The water's much warmer than the surrounding air, and it steams. At night, the Japanese cranes roost in midstream, safe from surprise attacks by its predator, the red fox. The cranes will stay in the river until the middle of the morning, waiting for the warming sun. Upstream, some of the yama-mei are beginning to stir. During their first winter, the yama-mei appear identical. They have grown up to 8 or 9 inches long, and their flanks are now beautifully patterned. But depending on how much food they find in the river, and on the genetic structure each fish has inherited, they will grow to maturity in one of 2 remarkably different ways. For the moment, all the yama-mei face a common enemy. Hunting opportunities for the crested kingfisher are limited to the stretches of the river where the rapid flow or a spring keeps the waters free from ice. Yamame are a key part of their winter diet. The pinpoint accuracy of the kingfisher's dive means that although many yamame hatch, many fewer survive the winter. The cranes wait until the sun is well up before they leave the river. They will spend the warmest part of the day looking for food, returning when the temperatures start to fall. Their favorite winter feeding grounds are the farms near the river, where they may find beneath the snow stubble left from the autumn harvest. Kindly farmers also leave out food for them. Japanese cranes are an endangered species. There are only 700 in northern Japan and a further 1,000 in parts of Russia and China. The people of Japan and China believe the cranes live for 1,000 years. The birds are icons, symbols of happiness and long life. They pair for life and are constantly reaffirming their bond. They begin their courtship rituals even before the breeding season begins, a tender two-step that heralds the coming of spring. Slowly, winter yields. In April, further north in the center of Siberia, the world's largest store of fresh water, Lake Baikal, begins its majestic thaw. Lake Baikal is almost 400 miles long and its surface area is huge, almost the size of Switzerland. The transformation from solid ice 3 feet deep to open water starts in the south and moves north at an average rate of 12 miles a day. The remarkable Lake Baikal is more than a mile deep and holds a fifth of the Earth's entire supply of liquid fresh water. The thaw is a trigger of transformation for the lake's animals. Lake Baikal is home to the only freshwater seals in the world, the nerpa. At less than 3 feet long, they're also one of the smallest. When mothers give birth in February and March, the ice acts as a cradle for the pups. The arrival of the thaw means they no longer have a safe resting place. The thaw is the time when the pups are weaned. First they molt their baby fur. Then they start finding their own food in the lake's unusually clear waters. The thaw transforms the marshes of Northeast Asia. Warmed by the strengthening sun, the waters from the melting ice and snow evaporate. Mists and gentle rain soften buds hardened for winter. Among the first to open its flowers is one of the most common plants on the wetlands, the willow. Over a few short weeks, the fresh water that has been locked up as ice and snow is released. The melting snow and spring rain fills the rivers to overflowing. The soil cannot absorb all the snow melt, and water floods across the marshlands. The waters help soften the soil and encourage new growth. Times are now easier for the shikar deer. No longer do they have to gnaw on hard bark. Instead, they dig for roots in the yielding soil, and they'll feast on the spring growth. When the flooding rivers recede, they leave water holes. Ezo-brown frogs interrupt their wintering to spawn in the shallow water. It's still too cold for them to find food, but by laying their eggs now, the frogs give their tadpoles the best chance of maturing before winter returns. The breeding ritual begins with the male frogs calling to attract females. A successful coupling starts when the male grabs a female in a tight grip. A larger male who tries to take over is sharply rebuffed, but doesn't give up easily. The firm embrace of the male helps the female to release her eggs, and as they leave her body, he fertilizes them. The female has laid about 1,000 eggs. The timing of the spawning is critical. The frogs need the water to be shallow enough to allow the eggs to be warmed by the sun, yet sufficiently deep not to dry out before the eggs hatch, usually in about 10 days. This breeding of the frogs in spring is crucial to other creatures. At night, a formidable predator emerges. For most of the year, the fish owl is true to its name. But in spring, when frogs are plentiful and easy to catch, they are its primary food. While temperatures remain low, there's not much else for the cranes to eat. Each bird weighs up to 20 pounds and needs a large amount of food just to keep going. The cranes have returned to the marshes to breed, and the frogs are a precious source of nutrition for the female before she lays her eggs. This pair have claimed a corner of the marshlands and prepared their nest from reeds. They already have one egg, and in a day or two may have a second. The eggs take about 30 days to incubate, and the male and female share the task. Though in most ways the cranes are supremely adapted to their wetland environment, their nests are vulnerable to rising water. To protect their eggs from the chilling floods that can follow heavy rains, they constantly build up the sides of their nests. The thawing waters of spring are the defining time for the Yamame. There's not enough food in the river to support them all. The most powerful males occupy the best feeding territories, driving off all rivals. By winning the competition for food, the strong males have selected themselves as the Yamame most suited to survive in the relative safety of the river. The best prospects for the other males and all the female Yamame will lie in heading downstream to the river mouth and growing to maturity at sea. During the 2 or 3 months it takes them to reach the coast, their physiology is transformed in preparation for their new life in salt water. By the time they reach the river mouth, the patterns on their flanks are fading. Their skin has turned to silver, and the tip of their dorsal fin turns black. The losers in the battle for survival in fresh water take their chances in the even more competitive saltwater environment. The dangers of the ocean will be much greater than those in the river, but so too will be the food resources. At the same time as the departing Yamame go to sea, the salmon who have survived 1 year at sea come back to the river to breed. The Japanese call the returning fish sakura masu, or cherry salmon, after the cherry blossom which flowers in early spring. Less than 10% of those who go to sea survive. But because of the plentiful food they've enjoyed in the ocean, they're now 20 to 30 times larger than the Yamame who drove them from the river. As the female cherry salmon return to fresh water, the parasite worms that have infested them at sea die, but battle scars from skirmishes with seals remain. There's no respite. For all the cherry salmon, the 3-month journey upstream to their birthplace will be fraught with dangers. Their first obstacle is perhaps the easiest. The brown bears are too clumsy and the cherry salmon far too nimble to make them an easy catch. The salmon head instinctively upriver, irresistibly drawn by the scent of the waters where they were born. As the season turns from spring to summer, Asia's freshwater rivers, lakes and marshes really come alive. When the water levels recede, new growth claims the silt-rich riverbanks. Each spring thaw leaves a legacy of new habitats, created from the silt and gravel swept downstream by the snow melt. Willows spread their seeds over the riverside like snow. The rising temperatures and drying air open the hard seed pods. A single tree can spawn 1 million seeds. Some will take a watery ride to new territories. Others will be blown as far as 30 miles away. Most will be lost forever. but some will settle on nearby muddy banks and bars of silt. The seeds take hold remarkably quickly, some sending out shoots within hours. Once they germinate, the young willows are hardy enough to withstand both flood and drought. Their speedy germination and toughness allows willows to secure a foothold where other species can't. When the pioneering willows have stabilized the riverbank, other trees follow. Soon a fringing forest develops, a leafy illustration of how rapidly the plants of Northeast Asia adapt to the seasonal rise and fall of rivers. The riverside forests provide an important food source for a wide range of insects associated with the river. Fallen willow leaves are a favorite food for the larvae of the caddisfly. Once they decompose, the leaves will also provide nutrients for the plankton in the river. The larvae of the caddisfly, and adult insects returning to lay their eggs, are the main food of the male yamame, who move to the best feeding stretches of the river as they await the return from the sea of the female cherry salmon. The influence of fresh water on the life of cherry salmon is far-reaching. Much of the fresh water which comes as rain finds its way underground, where it collects and gathers to emerge years later as springs. The springs converge to create streams and rivers which scour the land on their journey to the sea. Where land still resists the river, there are waterfalls. These freshwater barriers play a key role in the natural selection of the salmon. They're hurdles the returning salmon must cross in order to breed. They will need to gather all their strength to make the leap of more than 6 feet. Only the strongest and the most determined cherry salmon are selected and continue the journey to the spawning ground. Summer is the busiest season in the marshlands. Once the waters recede, the shallows are still. In this calm, warm environment, plants and animals proliferate, packing their reproductive energy into the few months that are free from ice and snow. Summer's plenty provides food and shelter for the growing crane family. Within days of hatching, the chick leaves the nest, following its parents around the marshes and learning what is food and what is not. Often the second chick hatches within days of the first, but seldom do both survive. In daylight, eagles are always a threat. Parents warn their chicks to stay out of sight in the tall grass. A fox looking for an easy meal takes on more than he bargained for. The crane is one of the top predators on the marshlands, with a kick that can smash a fox's ribs and a beak that can kill. A more insidious danger is unseasonable weather. Even in June, temperatures can plummet. If the weather's wet as well as cold, the young chick whose feathers aren't yet waterproof is at serious risk from hypothermia. The safest strategy is to stay close to its parents. For the first month of its life, the chick will sleep under its parents' wings at night, when temperatures are low. Japanese cranes lavish extraordinary care on their young. The survival of every chick counts. With an abundance of summer food, the marshlands are, for the cranes, a great place to bring up chicks. In the myriad ponds and bogs, freshwater plants and fish flourish in a frenzy of growing and breeding. The stickleback gets its name from its spiky dorsal fin. The male is the homemaker. He stakes out a territory and builds a nest of plant fiber around the stem of a reed. Building the nest is a day's work, but he constantly fusses over it. He glues the nest together with mucus. A female attracted to the nest carries out a careful inspection. Satisfied, she positions herself inside. The male induces her to lay by prodding around the joint of her tail fin. As soon as she lays her eggs, he darts through to fertilize them. If he's lucky, he will entice several females to his nest during the same breeding season. He looks after all of their eggs, cleaning them and driving a constant flow of oxygen-rich water through the nest by fanning with his fins. He chases off anything that approaches. Among the intruders are tadpoles hatched from the eggs laid in spring and who are now running the gauntlet of the marshes. Of the enormous number born, relatively few will survive. All around are mouths eager to dine. The camouflage of the waiting water mantis is almost perfect. The mouth of the water mantis is like a needle, which it uses to suck out all the tadpole's body fluid. In the marshes, nothing goes to waste, and the discarded carcass will soon be devoured by scavengers like the water beetle. It carries its air supply from the surface as a bubble on the rear of its shell. But by far the most ferocious tadpole hunters are the larvae of the large dragonfly. Victim number 1 was lucky to lose only its tail. The powerful jaws can flick out in a fraction of a second to clutch its prey. They take less than a minute to consume every scrap of a tadpole's body. But even the most dangerous insect hunter is helpless before the Japanese crane. The dragonfly larvae are popular snacks for the hungry chick. Though cranes do eat plants, in the breeding season they concentrate on finding animal matter for their chicks, mainly insects and small fish like goby and sticklebacks. Freshwater crayfish is another of the chick's favorites. It just requires more preparation. In summer, the marshes deliver the cranes everything they need. Within 100 days of its birth, the chick will have grown almost as big as its parents and will be ready to fly. Land and water merge in the marshlands of Northeast Asia. Marshes are lakes that are in the process of being gradually filled in by the steady accumulation of silt. Wherever the silt settles, plants begin to grow. It's a pattern repeated throughout the region. As season follows seasons by a process known as succession, lakes become marsh-like, and marshes, in their turn, become land. But in Russia's Lake Baikal, subterranean forces are so powerful, they turn all normal assumptions upside down. This is a lake that shows no sign of disappearing. Indeed, after 30 million years, it is still growing. Lake Baikal sits astride the junction of two plates of the Earth's surface, which are continually pulling apart. Though rivers and streams pour silt into Baikal, the ever-widening lake absorbs it. Because it has been isolated for so long, the lake has an enormous diversity of unique plants and animals. Bizarre branching sponges dominate a cliff face in the coastal shallows. They're green because of tiny algae embedded in their tissue that capture the sun's rays and help nourish the sponge. They flourish because of the abundant plankton in the lake, which they filter out. The sponges, in turn, are kept clean by herds of grazing amphipods, which feed off microscopic algae and wastes and help maintain the efficiency of the sponge's filtering system. The lake also claims the world's only freshwater polychaete worm. All other members of this group of animals are found only in the sea. There are over 300 species of amphipod in the lake. Some of these crustaceans are giants, the size of a mouse. Males often carry females around with them until they're ready to mate. Of the 50 fish species unique to Lake Baikal, more than half belong to the sculpin family. The stone sculpin has a strategy of wait and pounce. The priority in summer is to produce offspring before the ice returns. The yellowfin sculpin spawn among the rocks of the warmer shallows. Using his fins in display and by releasing pheromones, a single male may attract a procession of females, each of whom lay more than 1,000 eggs. The male tends the eggs throughout the 3 weeks they take to hatch. Like the stickleback, he uses his fins to fan them clean and to flush them with fresh oxygenated water. But many of the lake's creatures must go to the shore to breed. The pupae of the caddisfly have spent the winter under the ice and emerge in their millions to drift ashore as waves of living protein. Once they reach the lakeside, they transform themselves into fully fledged flies. As adults, they don't eat and may live only a few days. Their only purpose, reproduction, which begins in a swarming frenzy. They mate on the ground or on patches of snow that have lingered into summer. Then the females return to the water's edge to lay their eggs and become a feast for the waiting gulls. For the seals of Lake Baikal, summer means laying down fat before the ice returns. The biggest mystery is how the seals got here. Some say they traveled from the sea up the Yenisei River 500,000 years ago. Others believe they made the journey even earlier, when the Arctic Ocean and Lake Baikal were much closer to each other. The seals have larger forelimbs than their nearest living relatives in the Arctic Ocean and the Caspian Sea. In the marshlands, early morning mists are a sign the short summer is ending. Already the leaves of some trees are changing color. After 3 months, the cherry salmon have nearly reached their spawning ground, and they're beginning to live up to their name. When they set out from the river mouth and swam past the cherry blossoms, they were silver. Now, as autumn comes, their bodies redden. The males shift into breeding gear. Their jaws elongate, curving to reveal ferocious teeth. The cherry salmon are living off their reserves, propelled by the overwhelming instinct to spawn. Heedless of all dangers, they continue their headlong rush day and night. For some, the journey could end early. Night is the time many predators prefer. In this world between the mountains and the sea, the fish owl reigns supreme. Now it shows how it earned its name. As a final test of their endurance, the salmon who've survived the hazards of the journey must snake their way through some of the river's shallowest stretches. Now an extraordinary encounter unfolds. The tiny yamame who have stayed in the river wait to breed with the cherry salmon they drove away to sea. They have returned as giants and completely ignore the yamame, even the larger ones in their breeding colors of gold and black. Spawning starts as soon as she scrapes a nest. Females may attract the attention of more than one large male. Even though they're exhausted from their long migration, their mating instincts drive them into a frenzy of combat. The two are evenly matched, and their battle rages for more than 30 minutes. Eventually, the winner claims his female, but he must continue defending his right to fertilize her eggs. A further challenger is soon brushed aside. As the moment of spawning approaches, the male stimulates the female by vibrating against her. Although it seems that the tiny male yamame have no chance of mating, they know otherwise. When the yamame approach the female, they're so small that the large male fails to identify them as a threat, and so doesn't bother to drive them away. Although the yamame are too small for him to fight, their sperm are still effective. The moment to which their whole life has been geared is near. Immediately the female releases her eggs, the yamame rushes to fertilize them. The little male, the yamame, that never went to sea, gets its chance to breed. The female lays more than 2,000 eggs, which she protects by covering them with small stones. The male cherry salmon, who has fertilized most of the eggs, drives off other fish who try to eat them. Throughout the 2 weeks of spawning, the same ritual is played out day after day in hundreds of home streams. The yamame's sneaky strategy for spawning gives them a chance, despite their small size, of leaving offspring and passing on their genes. They fertilize fewer eggs than the cherry salmon. but their living is easier, and they enjoy the same lifespan. To return to their home waters, the larger males and females have had to survive the dangers of the ocean and the hazardous journey upriver. Once they arrive, they have only one chance to mate, and once that chance has passed, like other Pacific salmon, they die. The male yamame who hatched in the same spawning grounds never had to leave their home waters. And next season, some will even get a second chance to spawn. In death, the cherry salmon completes another cycle, delivering the bounty of the sea to the freshwater. As winter approaches, life in the marshes again begins to slow down. During the short summer, the reeds have grown up to 6 feet tall. Now they must spread their seeds before the ground hardens. A single cattail pod can spread tens of thousands of seeds, which will lie dormant until next spring. The frogs that have grown from tadpoles are preparing for their first winter. It'll be a further 2 seasons before they can lay eggs. The fallen leaves will make a protective shelter. Falling temperatures and chilling wind and rain cool the shallow waters of the marsh, and insects are now scarce. The crane chick is now nearly as tall as its parents and is eager to fly. It's becoming hard to find food on the marshes. Unless the cranes move soon, the chick won't survive. Its first flight may be a long one. The family head for farmland, to forage in the stubble. In the rivers, fresh water is returning to ice. Yet, even as everywhere activity closes down, underwater, new life is stirring. The cherry salmon eggs hatched 3 months ago. The fry have remained beneath the stones, sustained by the nutrients from their egg sacs. Now they emerge to feed. The cherry salmon cycle is renewed. As snowflakes begin to fall, the cranes renew the courtship calls which season after season underpin their pairing and strengthen their bonds. Although the harsh, freezing winters of Northeast Asia challenge all freshwater life, snow brings the promise of water to come. Despite the grip of winter, the crane's dance is a celebration of life and of the certainty that the abundance of spring will come again for the creatures of the thaw.